partner courts from across the region involved. And so it's really wonderful to see such an interest in this important topic. And I also want to, of course, welcome, and I will introduce briefly in a moment, Helen Burrows, both the Director of the Federal Court of Australia, but also a key resource and advisor under PJSI. Before we begin this first Sustainable Development Goals webinar, I would like to ask Kopu, the Chief Registrar of the High Court of the Cook Islands, to say the opening prayer.
Thank you, Laurie. Let us bow our head. Heavenly Father, thank you for bringing us today for our webinar. Give the strength and the knowledge to the PGSI team and all the delegates that are involved in this webinar, and hope that for our discussion today that we will have so many people to participate in sharing ideas in what we're supposed to discuss today. Be with us from the beginning to the end of our discussion as we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Kopu. So if I could have the next slide, please. So just as an introduction, as you are probably all aware, many of you have now used Zoom a number of times. We have the facility for a chat. It's generally, if your screen is set up similar to the standard setup, on the bottom right-hand side of the screen. And if you would like to ask any questions or make any contributions on your experience or other matters regarding the webinar, please feel free at any time to use that chat tool. And if we do have questions, we will very much try to answer as many of them as we can as part of the discussion section of the webinar. In addition, we are going to be recording as we do our webinars. It's basically a record for ourselves, but also for you and others in the region. It's going to be a webinar that's only password accessible. So it's not free to anyone to join or view, but it's definitely going to be on our site for your future reference or for any follow-up purposes. For matters regarding asking specific questions, or if you have a query of some sort, there is also the hand tool. It's the little blue button that you have on your screen. It's on the right-hand side once again. It's this blue hand, and if you click on that, then it will pop up a little hand next to your name, and then either I or one of the other facilitators can come to you when there's a break or if there's a question that we would like to have answered. So please feel free to use that at any time, and we'll get to you as soon as we are able to. And the final bit of housekeeping is very much just, we do ask that you stay muted for most of the time, not because we don't want your contributions, but just simply to limit or minimize the background noise. And hence using the hand tool, or if there is a bit of a silence, please feel free to unmute yourself if you've been asked. But this will really help us both with the recording, but also for everyone in the webinar to understand what's going on and to reduce feedback. I might have the next slide, please. So I'd really like to introduce Helen Burrows. Many of you know her already. She is one of our key advisors and also the director of the Federal Court of Australia's International Programs Unit. In that role, she manages PJSI's contract with MFAT, but beyond that, she has a role both as monitoring and evaluation advisor and SDGs advisor with PJSI. She's been working everywhere in the world, really, but most specifically in the Pacific for the last 10 years at least. And she's worked with many of your courts, and many of you, I'm sure, know her over that period. Her work's really focused on trying to not only achieve successful ongoing development of judiciaries and courts in the region, but also demonstrating the results, what's changed as a result of those efforts. And it's in that role or in that capacity that she's providing the support to the webinar and how to engage and how to address the Sustainable Development Goals. So without any more ado, I'd like to introduce or ask Helen to take over and start her presentation of the webinar. Thanks, Helen. Helen, I can't quite hear you if you are trying to say something, or have you dropped off?
Hang on. Okay, can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yes.
Can you hear me now? Yep. Okay,
yes.
Sorry about that.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Laurie, and thank you all very much for being here today. We really do appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us. I would say it's lovely to see you, but sadly I can't see any of you because I'm sharing my screen and I don't get the luxury of seeing you all as well, which is a shame given how infrequently I get to see you all these days. But still, thank you very much for being here, and we hope you enjoy the next hour and a half. So I don't really want to talk for very long because I think it's much more interesting to hear from all of you, but I do want to provide a brief introduction to this topic and why we're talking about it, and then we'll open up a broader discussion for everybody to contribute. So our objectives, as you all know, this is the first of 3 webinars. And so the objectives that we've set for ourselves with this first webinar is to really introduce the UN Sustainable Development Goals and tell you what they are and a little bit about them, although I'm pretty sure that a lot of you are already familiar with them to some extent. We also want to look at why and how these Sustainable Development Goals are relevant to us all and the development work that we are doing, because there's a lot of crossover, as you'll hear in a moment. And then we also wanted to talk about the progress that each country, including Australia, New Zealand, and of course all of our Pacific partner countries, are making towards the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, and how that national reporting process with the UN works. So I also wanted to give you a brief overview of sort of the direction that we're heading in, why we're doing this whole series. So the second webinar, what we want to be able to do is dive a little bit more deeply into all of this and identify some of the achievements and the challenges that you've each faced in implementing and reporting on the reform work that you've done and are doing that is connected to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then in the third webinar, we want to look at which of the Sustainable Development Goals connect to your priorities. So the things that you've each identified as your priority objectives, whether they be in your strategic core plans or otherwise, what you're working on or want to work on that most closely connects to the Sustainable Development Goals. Sorry, wrong way. And then how we may possibly strengthen connections between the goals and your development related objectives and activities. And finally, how to strengthen contributions to the SDGs through your work. So I'm sure that the webinar 2 and 3 objectives seem a little ethereal at this point because we haven't done the first one and understood the background work. But having thought it all through with my wonderful team, we think that is a useful direction for us to take. But of course, this is for you. So if there is a different, more useful or additional direction that you want this to take that can enable you to more closely connect your work, your objectives, and how you measure and report on that, then of course we absolutely want to hear that, hence the time that we've made available for the discussion during today's webinar. So, oh, sorry, I think, there we go. So there they are. Here's the wheel of Sustainable Development Goals. And this is what the rest of our discussion today and the following two discussions we're going to have will absolutely focus on. So what I'd like to do is very quickly take us through the 17 we use sustainable forms of energy that don't harm the environment. Number 8 is also one that we think that there's a big connection between the SDG, an inextricable link between this and SDG 5 related among different countries. Again, this is one that we'll talk about in a bit more detail. The SDG 11 relates to ensuring the safety, resilience, and sustainability of local communities, cities, and any type of human settlements. Number 12 involves the work of the courts, but ostensibly this relates to consumption and production. Now we move into the 3 goals that relate to the environment, 13, 14, and 15. And the first of these really draws a line underneath how important the environment is to the global community. And the request of all nations to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. Number 14 deals specifically with water and the oceans and sustainable use of them and what's in them, and the sustainable use of marine resources and their development. Again, this is another one and the next one that we've identified as of interest and relevant to your work. Not that we've particularly done a lot of work that specifically relates to the environment, but we appreciate that it's of deep concern to all of us, with impacts already being felt in many Pacific islands. And so we felt it important to include environmental protection in this discussion, to see what, if anything, you may be interested in doing beyond what you're already doing that can relate to these particular sustainable development goals. So the last one related to the environment is the opposite of the sea, the land, and promoting, protecting, restoring it, promoting sustainable use of it, combating things like desertification, halting land degradation, and biodiversity loss. And then the penultimate goal, which I think we'll all agree is the one that most closely resonates with us and all of our work and sort of ties everything else we are doing or may be doing related to previous SDGs, is the SDG 16 related to peace, justice, and strong institutions. So this is related to the promotion of peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development for people who live in all of these countries, providing access to justice for all, and building effective and accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels, which I know clearly all of you have been working on for many, many years and making great inroads and producing often quite staggering results in terms of that progress. But again, we'll talk about that in a bit more detail shortly. So the final goal, again, it's to sort of tie them together by the assertion that we all need to work together, that none of us can work in silos and achieve any of these goals. It's through partnership, it's through support, it's through collaboration and sharing and exchanges that we can learn from each other, support and help each other in the achievement of all of the rest of the goals. But given the primacy and importance of global partnerships, and bilateral and multilateral partnerships, such as PGSI's partnership with all of you, the UN decided that it was worth mention of on its own sustainable development goal, because they could see that without these partnerships in place, not a lot of change had been occurring, or it sort of undermines a lot of change. So that's all I really wanted to say about each of the sustainable development goals. There is a chance for questions, obviously, and we'll discuss them all in more detail, but I just wanted to provide a very brief overview of what they are. And next, I wanted to move on to discussing voluntary national reviews. And these reviews are the tool that each country that submits them uses to report to the United Nations on its progress related to the SDGs. Now, many countries report their progress to the UN in this form. Some don't, some are in the process of it. The comprehensiveness of the reports varies greatly between countries, as does the consultation that takes place within countries to develop these reviews in the first place. And it's the last point that we really want to focus on. So here is a number of, all of the Pacific Islands rather, who have so far submitted voluntary national reviews to the UN. And the Marshall Islands is in the process of developing its review. And these are done annually, or can be done annually, to keep the UN very updated with what's happening. And the Pacific Island countries that you can see in the third bullet point there, they're the ones where there's a reference included to the work of the courts. Now, we're not clear whether that involved consultation with you or your annual reports, or how that came about, but it was really wonderful to see reference to the work that the judiciaries have been doing, and you should have all received your nation's voluntary national review, and can see that. And if you haven't had a chance, I encourage you to read them, and that goes for everybody, whichever country you're from. Having a look at some of these voluntary reviews, particularly those that do reference the work of the court, is quite interesting. So the next thing we want to talk about is, so why are these SDGs relevant to us? I touched on it a little bit as I was running through each of the 17 goals, but I just wanted to drill down a little bit further, because this was the question that we needed to ask ourselves at the outset of this project. Why do the courts need to think about these SDGs? Do they have a mandate to? Do they have a responsibility to? Why are they relevant? So this is what we came up with. We looked at each of the Sustainable Development Goals and could see that some of them are clearly beyond the mandate of the court or its extended proactive responsibility to really get involved in. So we decided to take those out of the equation because there was really not very much that us as courts could possibly do to address them, such as hunger, education, healthcare. But for deciding or hearing cases related to the non-provision or lack of provision of these fundamental services, there's really not much that courts can do to be proactive to address those issues and therefore contribute to those goals. But there are at least 6 of the Sustainable Development Goals that your implementing activities about related to. So they're the ones that we're going to talk a little bit about. But what we did find through our analysis of the voluntary national reviews is that most countries do not explicitly connect their related activities to the specific SDGs. The SDGs sit over here, the court's development work sits over here, and they're not being connected. And I mean, I mentioned the few countries who, where the voluntary reviews mention the work that the court is doing and the progress it's made relative to particular SDGs. But beyond those countries, many courts, their governments, and certainly the United Nations remain unaware of the important contributions that partner courts are making towards the SDGs through the development work that you're each doing. And we thought that that was a problem because we think there's so much wonderful work that has been done and is being done, and so many measurably beneficial changes occurring as a result of that work. We want to make sure that not only your government, but the United Nations is very aware of that and can see very clearly and measurably the very important contributions that you're each making, which is why we're here. So the final piece of the presentation before I want to open the floor to a discussion is I wanted to connect the dots between PJSI and the thematic areas that it focuses on, and the particular SDGs that we thought we connect with. After this, we're going to have a deeper dive into and a discussion about the work that you're doing related to each of these thematic areas. So as I mentioned before, gender equality is one of the SDGs that we've identified that PJSI is working, and all of you are working directly in support of, whether it's prioritization, in strategic plans such as Vanuatu's latest plan, whether it's access to justice and the removal of gendered barriers to accessing justice. And that includes things like in Tonga, where domestic violence and children and other physical provisions have been made inside the courtroom to protect to physically protect and reduce ongoing of women who've suffered gendered violence. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about our projects. I want to hear from all of you about your projects, because that's more interesting. Human rights and gender family violence work we've done more broadly with a number of you relates very, very squarely to the equality goal. And something that's going to feature across all of the SDGs that I'm going to talk about in the collection and reporting of, in this case, sex disaggregated, broadly in the collection of reporting of court performance data. But so they're the 4 thematic areas that we're working on, that do 5. The next one is SDG 8, which relates to industry and decent work conditions and economic growth, to ensuring from a leadership perspective that all judicial and court officers have decent work conditions, and that there's people are happy in the workplace and confident in the workplace. This also relates to the professional development work we've done through professional, and as you will well know, we've run a lot of courses, whether they're orientation or decision making, that have certainly contributed to the number of countries, as I'm sure a number of you can attest to, having attended some of these activities. And again, the third way we see this through the collection and reporting of related court data. Okay, SDG 10, inequality. The work we're doing related to this is through access to justice, documenting fee waivers and access to legal aid, in human rights, in the prevention, treatment and remedying of inequalities, and again, reporting of related court data. Now, as I mentioned previously, the SDG 14 and 15 we've included in this so much because we've worked specifically on the sort of substantive or procedural legal areas related to it. But because we know it's of importance to make specific reference to it, I mean, obviously upholding domestic laws is very relevant, and the work that we've done with you is the fundamentals to assist with that, certainly, and also the certificate of justice and the diploma of justice that over 100 of you have been participating in itself well to being able to do this irrespective of the substantive area of law. And again, accountability through collection and reporting of data. 15 and the protection of life on land, we see the same connectivity. But as I said, if there is more focus that you would like to put on your core, you can do that more proactively or better connect your work to this SDG or better support it, then that's why we included it. SDG that we obviously saw relevant to our work is that related to peace and justice, SDG 16. And pretty much everything we've done and do, and I mentioned previously, related to the other SDGs and sort of houses them under the broader rubric of peace and justice. So some ability through access to justice and legal aid, removing barriers, to justice or access to justice through our human rights and gender family violence work. Here, though, we see an extended relevant or extension of the relevance of our accountability work for this particular SDG, where it includes not just the collection and reporting of data, but also the inclusion of public perceptions of the courts. Because as we all know, we do all of this work, we make all of this time, all these initiatives, ultimately for the benefit of the communities that we serve and the people that we support. So including perceptions about how the public see us is an important extension of how we can demonstrate the progress that we're making towards strong institutions in the region. So really that's all I wanted to say. I'm going to in a moment open the floor to a discussion. And to begin that discussion, I would very much like to hear from you related to any questions that you may have so far about the SDGs themselves, the voluntary national reviews, or the connectivity between the SDGs and PJSI and the projects that we're collaborating on. And then after that, I would like us to consider a couple of other questions and ask you what SDG related activities you've implemented in the last year or so, and those that you have planned, and which SDGs are most important to your court's current and planned development activities. So that's what I would like to discuss, and broadly at first, but in order for us to move forward to the second webinar, which is looking at some of the challenges and successes that you faced in implementing the extent to which the courts work and you are consulted by your governments to report on the nation's progress towards the SDGs questions. So, Laurie, unless there's anything else you want me to say right now or you would like to say, can we please open the discussion?
So,
excellent.
If I might just ask if you are interested or if you have a question, please put up your hand and we'll get to you. And that John Carey from the CJE is interested in starting us off, if I may call it that. So if I might ask you, John, well, and present or ask the question you have. Good afternoon. It's good to see you, John. It's been a while.
It has. I'm still, that's fine. Our team in ENG, I think Gitu Lago, Debbie Lodwana, and Sam Kaipu have done that have been put forward. What SDG activities has the court implemented in the past 12-18 months? And what do we plan to implement in the coming year? Current and planned development activities. So I'll ask Gitu to lead off, and then Debbie.
Thank you. Indeed.
Okay, thank you very much. It's nice to see you all. I'll be within the last 12 or 18 months. We worked on e-judiciary and e-court programs. That is done through the system the project that was implemented this year, which is called the Integrated Electronic Case Management System. This basically, what it does is to record the cases where you are, and the registry people take it up and process it. We also have, in relation to that e-judiciary and e-court programs, we also have integrated criminal case system database. It's also a database similar to a integrated electronic case management system. This is specifically for criminal justice system. It was developed and the court is still rolling it out right throughout the country. The third one we have is the use of PNG sentencing database. This is to provide judges and other stakeholders with statistics, similar cases and other reference materials to assist with the decision making. So we have this database which we have implemented, and specifically the integrated electronic case management system it kicked in this year March because of the COVID-19, and it is in working. It is being used now at the moment in the court as we speak. The second thing we have been doing in our court is we are now embarking on the digitalization of all the court records. So all the documents that we have, or the court files, everything that comes into our registry used to be in a paper form. Now we are scanning those informations into PDF and they are filing them. So that's one of the things that we are doing to become the e-judiciary and e-court programs. One of the things that we also did in the court is the increase of number of judges, female judges especially. Previously, we have only one, and will correct me on those data that I'm giving, and Tony also will assist me on. The number has increased to 7 judges now, 7 females within this 12-month period or 18 months. We are now working on realigning the registry and corporate services to efficiently respond to our needs within the structures, the people, to have them oust pro PNG-CJE. Okay. The other thing within this training is that our court in response team, emergency team. So this court come to court the distance, all this clinic which is managed by outsourced to the St. John's respond to those in relation to 18 years, months. We worked some of these things, or even Mr. Kerry will add some there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, just to expand on what Gitu, conducting structured community, including the registrar, traveling out in MOUs with its partner organization, Wales, Australia, assisting in the establishment of the electronic library service. Also MOU with the Federal Court of Australia and the Solomon Islands Judiciary. The court is also taking drastic measures to improve the clearance rate of the national court cases through increasing of the number of judges. I think we currently have about 44 judges now. 7 of them are female judges, and through also providing continuous training on court efficiency. Another project that is still undergoing is the construction of the Waigani Court. It is also in the process of completing in the provincial areas, national court buildings and provincial centers and districts. So I will now go on to the second question, just relating the SDGs to these plans and reforms that the court has undertaken. With regards to strengthening and supporting the courts via e-judiciary and embarking on digitalizing of court cases, in these ones, we also notice that it relates to SDG number 9 on industry, innovation and infrastructure, which talks about ICT connection, broadening opportunities for capacity building and increase of workforce productivity. This also relates to, of course, to SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions under the area of governance and institutional strengthening, relating to improvement in court case registration and management through digitalization. In increasing the number of female judges, I think we're trying to address the SDG number 5 on gender equality, women in leadership. Currently, from observation, the court is yet to really embrace the concept of gender equity and social inclusion, and it might be something that would be implemented, a plan that should coming year also, especially to emphasize more on with regards to restructuring and realignment of the registry, plus the establishment of the NJSS COVID-19 response team, that also would come under SDG 16. Also, that would also come under reduced inequalities, SDG 10, that will lead to women economic empowerment, under decent work and economic growth. That's for that. And the last one on construction of the Wageni Court Complex and other national courthouses around Papua New Guinea. This is related to, of course, to SDG 16 infrastructure development. I also would like to state some areas for improvement that the court can look into, the PNG courts can look into, is to relating to mediation services. I think courts and parties need to utilize the mediation services that is provided within the courts as well. Ongoing progress is the implementation of the three-tier court system, and also to strengthen partnership with other law and justice sector agencies within the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debbie. Appreciate that. Before I pass on to you, Sam, any next people who would like to go second, please put up your hand. If not, I will probably have to do the roll call and go through all of the courts that are represented anyway. So we will be asking each and every one of you. So briefly, Sam, if I might ask, just being conscious of the time, if you have any additional contributions to make, and also if you could address whether you know or not of the fact whether the judiciary actually contributed to Papua New Guinea's voluntary national report or didn't actually get involved in that process. You will need to unmute yourself, yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have been invited to answer the question, how have recent CJE activities assisted the Supreme and National Court of Papua New Guinea in preventing, treating, and remedying gender and family violence and breaches of human rights? Now, what I have found is that there has been two very foundational workshops, both initiatives of the Pacific Island or PJSI and the PNG CJE. While those foundational workshops have been very, very fruitful, I cannot say for the record that we have done any survey or surveys to show how the courts have actually applied the knowledge and change of attitudes that they had acquired in those workshops. I have had a quick look at the voluntary national review by the government of Papua New Guinea. I have not been able to see any reference to participation by the courts of Papua New Guinea. A whole lot of other people have been included, including the private sector. But there's nothing with reference to the contribution made by the courts to the National Voluntary Review. But be that as it may, I have focused on the outcomes of the two foundational workshops. Much has been covered, both in terms of the international law and the domestic law, with respect to promoting gender equality, and especially promoting human rights in respect of women. And there has been much contribution from the judiciary and the magistracy in terms of how the courts should in future include their understanding and the methodology derived from both the international law and the national laws in their judgment, in their decision-making processes, and reflect what they had learned in their judgments. Looking at the judgments to date, I cannot, without the support, without the data, say that the judgments do reflect all that has been learned. But I can say that there have been important exceptions, especially with regard to human rights and the detention center on Manus Island. In regard to the detention center on Manus Island, the Supreme Court showed tremendous courage and independence, as a judicial should be, to go ahead and make a decision which declared the detention center on Manus Island unconstitutional, for the basic reason that these were people who had not committed any offense at all, whether civil or criminal, but had sought asylum, a place to live elsewhere, but had been detained because they had not been successful in getting to those places where they could go. And going back to what I said earlier about feedback, I can attest that 36 judge participants and 35 magistrate participants showed tremendous courage in saying, while we have not at this point in time expressly seen the connections between our judgment-making processes and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we are determined that in the future, we will give these goals all the support that they deserve through our judgments and, of course, the general decision-making processes. And I should think that in the very near future, if we can run a survey or two and obtain from the participants how they have applied their learning and the change of attitude and the methodologies that they had been taught, and that applied them in their decision-making processes, I think would be going in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting if I am, but I am conscious of the time and the others that might want to contribute as well, if I may, Sam.
Okay.
But thank you for that very, very detailed update from Papua New Guinea. It's very interesting to see, particularly the interest in aligning the judgment or decision-making processes with the SDGs and your obligations with regards to promoting those. I'm just looking to see whether there are any other hands up, and I don't see anyone. So I might ask the next person on our participants list, or next country rather, if I might briefly ask you, Emmy, to just give a brief response to those questions or someone from your court. As I say, if we could just keep it brief so that everyone might have a go, that would be greatly appreciated.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Laurie, and our greetings from the Federated States of Micronesia to all of you. It's good to see everyone. For the FSM, as Helen mentioned earlier, the Federated States of Micronesia is one of the countries that have submitted its voluntary report, SDG report. So the question whether the courts were involved in the report itself, I frankly do not know whether we had any input in the national report. However, the court was mentioned in some of the areas, so criticized, I would say. This is in the TIP report, which was mentioned. I believe this is SDG 8. So relating to what the court has done for the past year or so, with the partnership with the BJSI, we have the FSM court has actually conducted gender family violence workshop in 2 of the 4 states, and that is in the state of Pohnpei and in Chuuk. And the rationale behind selecting the 2 states is because those are the 2 states that have actually passed its its Family Protection Act. And so those 2 states were received that with the support of BJSI, received that training. Additionally, we have done access to justice enabling rights workshop in all the 4 states. And again, thank you to BJSI. Not only have we conducted the training in all the 4 states, but we were able to translate the entire toolkit in the 4 different languages. And that was a major project that was needed. As some of our partner states should know, we are the Federated States of Micronesia, but composed of 4 different countries or states with totally different culture, totally different languages. So in order to be able to implement this project, the access to justice, we first had to translate the whole toolkit into the 4 different languages. So that was one of the very successful workshop or project that we did. I'm gonna be jumping back and forth as to what SDG is related to us, because looking at these SDGs, they're sort of overlapping one another. So regarding the accountability, I'm jumping now to 16. The court issues annual reports every year. And our 2019 is a bit delayed, and we're expecting to send that off. If not by the end of the week, it will be next week. But it has the public perception on the survey. This is something that the court does every year. And based on the results, we're able to improve or take action as to the areas that are needed. So based on that, the survey, we have implemented some internal policies to improve how we approach the public on these things. There are a lot of other things, but due to the timing, I just want to highlight some of the projects that are occurring annually, and that is the National Law Day debate. We just completed our, again, the National Law Day last week. We celebrate our anniversary in July of every year. However, due to the lockdown or the travel restrictions, we're able to, we postponed it to this month, and we were able to conduct our first ever virtual debate with all the states, students debating from their respective states. And And that was pretty exciting. And that was a successful project. The trial counselor certificate program, that is something that we continue to work. This is in the education sector. We work closely with the College of Micronesia, FSM. This is now a certificate program with the college. So that's something that has gone back as far as 20 years ago, maybe with our local folks who are unable to go to law school but willing to take some legal training. So that's something that we've done. We have also done staff upgrade, capacity building, and all that. There are several UN conventions that FSM is a signatory of: CEDAW, CRC, the People with Disability, the Corruption Act. We have done some infrastructure upgrades. We have our disability parking. These will be in our annual report. So I don't want to really spend too much time on it, but I just wanted to touch base on those. Gender equality, I'm very happy to say that the FSM judicial branch is very sensitive to the gender equality. And I can say that we are probably the branch in the nation that is equal in terms of gender staffing. We have female judges, we have female attorneys, we have female division heads. And if I were to count, I think the female, we have more female than male. So our Chief Justice wanted me to express that we are one of the, probably the only branch in the nation that has more female than male. So that is something that we're very mindful of. Regarding there are, I think it was SDG 16 and 8 that touched a little bit on the TIP report. The court was criticized because of the lenient, they said it was the sentencing by one of our justices was too lenient. And it was in the newspaper here as well. That was the first human trafficking conviction that was in the state of Chuuk. But after that, the sentences have changed, and we have not gotten any complaints from the general public. That was one of the perception of the people when it came out on the first the survey, that the courts are too lenient. But after the access to justice training, I think people now understand more of what the court does and why sentences occur. That it takes two parties, public defender and the prosecution, that this could be their recommendation. So good or bad, you know, we get the blame and the compliment for it. The other SDG that I briefly wanted to touch on, that this is on the land and the sea, life underwater. Some major funding economy comes from our fishing, the ocean, the fishing industry. So although it doesn't really reflect the operation of the court, the daily operation, we've had cases that were filed with the national court on illegal fishing. And the sea cucumber case, that case came in from the NGO, environmental NGOs. So we do have cases that are brought to the court in violation by different countries, in violation of our ocean, our fisheries. So I just wanted to also bring that up. I think I'm going to end there, Lori, to give more time to others. But like I said, our annual report is about 68 pages, and it involves a lot of the discussions that we're having now. So I'll leave it at that. And so thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmy, and I appreciate the volume of work that you and most or many of the other courts are doing. to that end, I really am conscious that the volume of work each court is doing is really significant and a really great experience. But unfortunately, I don't think we will have time to be able to go through all courts and answer each of the questions that are up on the screen at the moment. So the approach I'd like to suggest is, if each of you who is participating could potentially just email Madeline or us all a very brief list, or if you, like Emmy, you have it in your current annual report, all of your activities. If you could just highlight those activities you've undertaken, so basically question 1 on the slide, by email or via your annual report, can you please do so in the next day or two? Which then brings us to the second question: which of the SDGs do you feel are most important and relevant to your court? And if we could just limit our responses from now on to that. I apologize for the change in approach halfway through, but otherwise we just will not get anywhere near finished within 1.5 or 2 hours for the webinar today. With that in mind, which is the most important, or which are the most important SDGs for your court? Is there someone who'd like to put up their hand before I keep going down the participants or the country list for our webinar? If not, then if I might ask you, Masisi, or a representative from Kiribati, which do you think is the most relevant, or which are the most relevant SDGs for the courts in Kiribati? And also, I note you have a voluntary national report. Did you or your court get involved in providing contributions to that voluntary national report?
Thank you, Rory. Can you hear from there?
We can hear you very clearly, thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to focus on the SDG itself. Maybe it is a question from me, because I can see on the SDGs that there is about land and the sea. Maybe in the future, the sky can be included as well, because there is for example, in Kiribati, the sky is very important to us. We have a very big sky, but it's not covered in the SDG. We are not involved in the SDG itself, but to me, the most important activity that we are on now is the structure reform, or the structural reform of the judiciary. Because in the past, the court in Kiribati are administered by the high courts. But now, as you can see, starting March 2019, there is a reform going on. And the divisions, there are divisions now being created within the judiciary Kiribati, and there is the High Court and the Magistrate Court and the General Administration, that we call it Judicial Technical Division that I'm managing. So that is the most important reform activity to our courts here in Kiribati, is the structural reform. With that reform, there will be many changes to the court and the human resource, also our development. Because as you know, in the past, in the past, the development was not, there was no one focusing on the development of the codes, because the High Court and the Magistrate Court we're focusing on the code itself. I mean, inside the codes and outside the codes, but there was no big development to our code. So maybe we can relate that to equality and equality, especially the reform, because we are now trying to be recognized as one of the separate and independent arm of government. So we need that reform to strengthen our judiciary, to be recognized as one of the separate and independent arm of government. That is from me, Rory. The Chief Registrar.
If I might just ask, or the Chief Registrar, whichever would prefer to answer, your involvement, did you, or the court rather, be involved in the development of your voluntary national report or not?
Can you come again, Rory?
Hello?
Hello? Deputy Chief Registrar, may you respond to that?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me clearly? Okay,
we
thank
can
you.
now.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yes. So, speaking of that, I apologize for. In that kind of. In respect to what you're asking, but even I haven't seen the report, but yeah. So basically, for that, I haven't seen the report and could provide more on the, could not provide any, yes. But I could speak a few on some of the SDGs that are most important to our code as well. As what my colleagues, Mosisi, have mentioned about the three divisions that we have exist, within the judiciary. I and the Chief Registrar basically are dealing, focusing based on the development of the High Court as well. And this one of our development activities that we are we're trying to maintain and that we are currently undertaking is the trying to have most of our judicial staff to be qualified. And we're thanking PGSI that's supporting this idea of having some of our court staff undertaking the Certificate of Justice and Diploma of Justice. Also, our current activity that we are still carrying now is the consultation of the new rules of the High Court. Well, as you are aware, or most of you guys are aware of, we've been using the Western, sorry, Moses, what is it called again? The Western, yeah, it's the UK, is the 1964 rules, but now we are having, we are carrying on our consultation of the new rules that we actually are working on, and it's almost about to be published and launched, probably in a few months ahead. Yes, and also as what some of our PNG colleagues have mentioned about the increased number of judges. Yes, we currently have 2 judges of the High Court, Chief Justice, and 1 judge newly elected in 2018. And now we are currently recruiting 1 for this year and 1 for next year. Since we have backlog cases that I think probably PGSI have seen and have read in our annual report for 2013 and 14, and those are some of the the challenges and issues that we are focused now to try and decrease those issues. Yes, thank you. I think that's what I can provide for now. And
appreciate both your and Rupert's contributions. Which brings us very briefly, I realize I'm out of alphabetical order, but nonetheless, to you, Alison, if you or the Palau Judiciary could very briefly just highlight, not so much the activities, as I said, if you could just email those to us, but which of the 17 SDGs do you think are most relevant and important to your court? And I know you have a voluntary national review or have had one undertaken. Did the court get involved in that?
Okay, so as far as the voluntary national review, yes, the court was involved. We were involved with the Ministry of Justice. We were working group 7, and we dealt with SDG 16.
Okay. So only the one.
Yeah, it was myself and Maka, and I believe there was communications with Senior Judge Redeem of the Court of Common Pleas. I think it was SDG 16, and we also had to deal with SDG 5, gender equality.
And very briefly, do you think those are the only relevant SDGs to your court, or do you feel others are also important, or are they just the principal ones?
No, there's so much more. One of them being SDG 10, access to justice, reduce inequalities, because one of our challenges now is, even though we've built an elevator to give access to people with disabilities to both court buildings, Nakamura building and the Pablo Ringang building, we're still having challenges with our outlying states where people out there can't access, they would have to come in by boat to Koror to file a petition for a protective order. So that's like one of our challenges that I believe we're still working on. And then also in relation to, one of the things that we want to implement is a risk management plan or policy, and that's in relation to climate change, which I think was, climate action, which is SDG 13. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, because we know it's not changing, we know it's coming. There's a lot of things affecting the courts, one of that being climate change. And we need to develop a risk management plan in case there's a typhoon or anything that would affect the court and its services.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. When you have that, please feel free to email it to us, and we would be happy to distribute it to our other counterpart courts for their information.
Okay, great. We'll do. I'll do it by today.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Greatly appreciated. Thank you, Palau and Alison. Next on our list is the Marshall Islands. Ingrid, I understand you are in the process, or rather the country is in the process of doing a voluntary national report. And is your court involved? And which are the most important SDGs to your court, do you feel? That's if we still have Ingrid. Have we lost Ingrid? Well, moving on then, unfortunately, Kopu, or the Cook Islands, which is the most valuable, or which are the most useful SDGs to your mind?
Kia ora, Laurie. Sorry, Laurie. I'm looking at the SG. I think in the Cook Islands, we are pretty much based probably on number 5 and number 16. Well, maybe number 8 as well, but working towards that way as well as number 10.
Okay.
So number 10, so we're actually in the process of reviewing with the legal aid, because over here that just only applies to civil criminal, but there's nowhere somewhere in our process or the legislation that gives us support for land as well, but that's working towards what we had put in place. And some of the things that we talked about in the national SDG, and pretty much some of these have been covered in our national sustainable development goals and plan, which I will leave our IT person Mitchell to briefly give you some information on that.
Thank
Mitch.
you.
Thank you, Laurie.
Kia ora, everyone. We were just discussing before, that's why we've been offline for a while. We're just putting some discussions on if we were aware of our reporting criteria to the SDGs. As far as we know, the Cook Islands is not actually a membership to the UN. So what we do understand is our reporting criteria is to our Central Policy and Planning Office, which is underneath the Office of the Prime Minister. So they do the reporting to these regional organizations on as a whole for the whole country. But then they also are the administrators, and they monitor the National Sustainable Development Plan for the Cook Islands, which at the moment, like Kupu said, has been reviewed. The last plan was from 2016 to 2020, which I have open here at the moment. In there, the goals are pretty much the same as that for SDG. Like we've got goals we are targeting as well. Number one being improved welfare, but from on a national perspective, where justice comes into play is really goal number 16 for our NSDP, which is promote a peaceful and just society and practice good governance with transparency and accountability. I think that's where we also contribute data towards the reporting on the National Sustainable Development Plan, which we also have worked into our ministry strategy plan. Our ministry vision for the moment is for a safe, secure, just and fair society with a trusted and management information and register systems. So again, that's where we've dictated what our vision are and our actual deliverables, which is priority one, strengthen human resource expertise, which involves training, of course, for all our staff. And recently, we've just completed in the past few months, we've done the Justice of the Peace training over Zoom, where we've incorporated the trainers from Helen,
Laurie and them.
Yeah, and also the outer islands as well. So that's one of the things we've done in the 18 months. And also one of our priorities for the ministry is applying modern information technology, which is quality IT solutions, and throughout this for the court and all that. But again, I think this could go on, and we could talk more about this maybe on another subject, or if we could do one-on-one. But then I think
we could. But feel free to email us those activities if you have. That's what we would appreciate that a lot.
Yeah. So
and are you involved in this next National Sustainable Development Plan? The court is involved in developing that, or parts of it?
I'll pass you back to Kopo, because next week we are due for an interview with the Central Policy and Planning Office again. Again, they are the coordinators. They're the ones that actually manage the whole development plan for the whole country. So us and other ministries will be taking part as well, right?
Yes, Laurie. What Mitchell was saying, that we will be involved in dealing with the sustainable meetings and discussion that will be next week.
Yeah. It'll be
wonderful. Thank you. Just to see whether the board is involved in that process. Wonderful. Okay. Appreciate you. And Vanuatu is the last on our list of countries. I think next time I might have to go in reverse alphabetical order just to be fair to you. But nonetheless, I think Chief Justice Lunebeck had to go back to court. So if I might ask Shemi or Wendy what SDGs they feel are the most valuable or important to their courts. Wendy, you're on mute. Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Out of the SDG, we have a National Sustainable Development Plan. And within that Sustainable Development Plan, we have 3 pillars. There's this society, environment, and the judiciary is under society. And some of the indicators that we report against mainly is the court statistics and the cost of services. And I think one of the SDG indicators that we focus mostly on is 16. Doesn't mean that the others we're not focusing on, but it's more implemented by the Ministry of Justice. We report against the indicator mainly on SDG 16. That is on court statistics and the cost of legal fees and services that we provide. Yeah, that's all, Laurie.
Thank you very much. Very short and sweet. Appreciate it. Maybe your implementation plan, next implementation plan can be framed around the SDGs too.
Yeah.
That's the summary of all of our countries. It's been amazing to hear so many stories and so much activity occurring across the region. It's wonderful to hear. Yes, there's a lot to do, but it's also good to see that there's so much positive action occurring as well. So with that, I'd like to pass over to Helen to just summarize the discussion, if she will, before we wrap up.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you, Laurie. And thank you all very much. I think we could sit here for another few hours, and I could very happily do that and listen to all of this in much more detail. And of course, we've only got half of our countries participating today. So a full discussion with everyone, I think this warrants a much longer discussion, but sadly we don't have any more time. But as Laurie asked, if you were able to email us the documents that you were speaking from and anything else related to what we've talked about today, that would be really, really interesting, but also very helpful to us to be able to look at, from a regional perspective, which of the SDGs that are becoming most prominent to most courts that we can then focus in on for the future webinars, and look to bolster reporting through either the voluntary national review process or other processes, and also bolster work that you may wish to do that relates squarely to particular SDGs. And also I should mention that when we have sort of made that connection between your work and the SDGs, there's a lot of funding out there from the UN and related bodies that's very much dedicated, as some of you may already know, of course, that's very much dedicated to making progress towards the SDGs. So we'll explore that also as we sort of get clearer about the connectivity between your work and the SDGs. But just very briefly to summarize before we sort of get towards the close, is that, as I said, that the SDGs, there are 17 of them, and they're guiding global development to 2030. They come after the Millennium Development Goals that ran to 2015, and these now run for the next 15 years to 2030. There are very strong connections between the SDGs and the work that you're doing, as was made we already knew, of course, but that was made even clearer to us through what you shared during today's discussion, which is really interesting. And that some SDGs are more of a priority for various courts than others. And as I said, that's what we want to be able to focus more deeply on in the 2 webinars that we have coming next. So please do send us all of your information. We'll be seeking this from other partner courts who weren't able to join us and participate today, and then we will send you the outcomes of that in summary form. So that will frame the next 2 webinars. So the next webinar is going to be on Thursday, the 5th of October at the same time. And as I said, that's the purpose of that is to look at achievements, progress, challenges, and the like as you're implementing activities that relate to the SDGs. And also the team wanted me to tell you that Leadership Incentive Fund applications are open. So if there's work that, additional work that you wish to do that focuses on SDGs or on your connectivity to them, your reporting about work related to them, either in your annual report or to your governments, then we can certainly discuss that through a Leadership Incentive Fund project.
And if
So,
if I might interrupt, Helen, briefly, apologies. With the LIF, of course, that is not just related to SDGs. We very much encourage you all to consider using the LIF to support participants with regards to the USP certificate or diploma of justice. And of course, any other types of activities that fit within that application framework that your courts might be interested in implementing. So please get these applications or drafts to us as soon as possible.
Thanks, Laurie. I didn't have anything left to say. I think it's time for me to hand over to Madeline. Is that right, to ask some other questions?
Lovely. Thank you, Helen. Nicole here. We've just got a last survey. So we just want to run a brief anonymous poll, which should be appearing on your screens now. So there's just a few questions we'd love to run through and appreciate your feedback from today's webinar. The first question is, do you understand the connection between the SDGs and your court's development agenda? And the answers provided as a multiple choice are extremely clearly, quite clearly, somewhat clearly, or not clearly. Please feel free to click on that and go through the questions as you scroll down. The second question, do you understand the purpose and content of the voluntary national reviews? So fully, reasonably, limited, or no? Question 3, did you find that the structure of the webinar allowed for adequate participation, discussion, and interaction? Question 4, so today, as you connected through to this Zoom webinar, how easy was it for you to connect? Question 5, how effective did you find the remote learning approach via Zoom? Question 6, how confident do you feel using the Zoom interactive tools, for example, the chat, the hand raising, and this polling tool? Excellent. And the last question, have you participated in an online remote workshop or training of this nature before? And once you've had the opportunity to answer those questions, if you can click on the blue button at the bottom, I can see we've got about 7-8 responses. I'll just give it another 20 seconds or so for those last minute responses. Lovely. Excellent. I'll look to end the polling now. Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate your feedback. And that's all from me. Laurie, would you like to wrap up?
Happy to do so. Thank you. Thank you all. It's been a fascinating discussion, as we've highlighted, and as Helen touched on, it'd be wonderful if we could continue to do so. If there are extra matters that you do want to highlight, please get in contact with us, either by email, or we can even have a follow-up call with you. One or the other of our team can get together with you and have a chat about those things, should there be something of interest. We very much look forward to seeing and hearing from you all again in the next webinar. As Helen mentioned, that's on the 5th of October. We touched on in our earlier emails that we'd really appreciate it if the same participants could join us for those webinars, as the second and third webinars do definitely build on the discussion and the understanding we've created in our first introductory webinar on the SDGs here today. So thank you very much. It's very, we understand it takes a lot of time and effort for you and your courts to participate, but without you, it just would not be the success today's webinar was. I'd also like to thank Helen, who got up at the unearthly hour of about 3 a.m. her time in Malta to be able to facilitate as the trainer or the facilitator for our webinar. So thank you very much for that. And of course, your IT and background staff and ours here at PJSI, who also then of course make this sort of technological marvel a reality for us. So thank you all. I wish you all a very good afternoon and evening, depending on where you are, and look forward to seeing you in about 4 weeks' time. Goodbye.
Great, thank you.